Hello, everyone. I'm Ned Jones, and I'm the Election Integrity Director at the Virginia Project. And today we're giving you our interim report on our election integrity program. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Virginia Project, we're a partisan conservative political action committee established to rebuild the Republican Party in Virginia from the bottom up. We invest in local unit party infrastructure, candidates, and volunteers. We focus solely on Virginia state level activity and intend to turn the state red in this November's election. We are nearly entirely volunteer run. Our main areas of focus are recruiting and supporting candidates, assisting the local GOP units, taking on election integrity, and taking on cultural issues on behalf of affected Virginians. The Virginia Project was founded by David Gordon in November 2019 after the General Assembly went blue. He was fed up with the lack of coordination, organization, and leadership in the Republican state party. We rely on volunteers and donors to further the mission and punch far above our weight in terms of success and outcomes. Our goal is to get the entire state Republican apparatus in line and effective by showing them success is possible. And so I want to explain to you where we are in our election integrity program. Many in the Republican Party, I would call it establishment Republican Party, have moved on. You know, they say, well, we're on to the next election. We lost the last one. The Democrats always cheat. They maybe cheated a little bit more this time, but they won, and so let's move on. Well, here at the Virginia Project, we're actually looking backwards at what happened in November, and then taking what we learned and looking forward to the election this coming November. And one area that we're looking at very closely is a mass mailing that was done by an organization called the Center for Voter Information, also called the Voter Participation Center. It's a nonprofit, left-leaning organization in D.C., and they sent out over 2 million absentee ballot applications in Virginia. And you may have heard about them. They were in the press last fall because 500,000 of those absentee ballot applications had a return envelope with the wrong address. Fairfax County apps were going to go to Fairfax City. And that made the news. The Center for Voter Information put out a statement saying that they had made a mistake with their mailing house to create this problem, which was very costly to correct, and also allowed them to send out an additional 500,000 absentee ballot applications. But as I investigated the Center for Voter Information's activities, I found that the same mistake was made in several states, that is, return envelopes with the wrong address. So my feelings are that it was intentional and that there are no coincidences, and it was something they did to cause confusion with all the mail-in ballots there were, and really flood the states with absentee ballot applications. In Virginia and other states, they had a return address on their mailer that looked like a regular business address. It had a street, it had a suite, but actually what it was a UPS store in Richmond, and the suite was one of their mailboxes. And I found similar addresses in UPS stores in at least 8 other states where they were operating. And so they had a special deal with the post office. They sent out these mass mailings, and when the mail couldn't be delivered, they didn't get the mail back. They got a list from the Postal Service explaining why the mail wasn't delivered and where it wasn't delivered. So they took this list that I like to call a list of unlikely voters. That is, voters who are registered in Virginia who have a different address than the address on the voter rolls. And what we're investigating right now is who actually may have voted for some of those voters. This situation with the Center for Voter Information got the attention of an organization called the Capital Research Center, and they've released a article about them. They run a website called Influence Watch, and they have some interesting information about the Center for Voter Information on their website. Another thing we're looking at, which kind of ties into this, is the daily absentee ballot application file, which is a huge file of every absentee ballot that was filed in Virginia by date. What we found was 400,000 of those applications were canceled. We're not sure why. It could be that the voter decided to vote in person as opposed to file their absentee ballot, but 400,000 seems like a huge number, and we're trying to find out who submitted those applications. Was it the actual voter, and why were they canceled or deleted? And so our plan is to actually canvass voters in April. We do have some emails, we have some phone numbers, and we're going to actually try to contact these voters and see if they did file multiple applications and then subsequently they were deleted, why, or could it be that someone else filed these applications on their behalf. Another file we have, but only for one district in Virginia, is the National Change of Address file from the Postal Service, known as the NCOA file. And we're looking at this to see how many voters have moved and are still on the voter rolls with their old address. What's supposed to happen is when we clean up the voter rolls, and the state does this, those voters are removed when they've permanently moved to a new address. And what we're finding in this one district is 8% of the voters who are registered in Virginia have a different address. Many of them out of state. I believe 4 to 6% are out of state. When you think about 6 million voters in registered voters in Virginia, 8% would be around 480,000, which is the possible number that may have moved and still been on the rolls. So as a part of our canvass of voters in April, we'll be calling some of these out-of-state voters and some of the voters who have moved to see if they voted in Virginia in November. And if they did not, then someone else voted for them. And that brings us to something that's a major issue in the state right now, and that is voter rolls maintenance. According to law, the voter rolls should have been updated at least 90 days before the federal election last year, and they were not. As a matter of fact, it's hard to find out when they were last updated according to state law. Excuse me. There was a report from the State Department of Elections explaining that they weren't able to do it last year. Of course, COVID was the excuse, and that they were planning to do it in December. We're trying to find out if it was done, and then if it was done, get a listing of the updated voter rolls with the maintenance performed and also with the history of the voters who voted in the last election in November. Because some people are saying that it could be as much as 10% bad. In other words, 10% of those 6 million voters should be removed. It includes people who've moved, as I said earlier, dead voters, voters who are registered under their maiden name that have subsequently been married, inactive voters. Some voters haven't voted ever, and all of a sudden they voted last year. And then illegal non-citizens who are not allowed to vote. Now, the State Department of Elections is supposed to maintain the database of our voter rolls, and then the local registrars actually do the work of maintaining the list. And we think there's a breakdown there between the Department of Elections and the local registrars, and the list is just not being maintained. But we're told that it was supposed to be done in December, and we're supposed to get the new voter rolls listing this month. Another area of concern for us is something called logic and accuracy testing of our voting machines. Now, this logic and accuracy testing, which is known as LNA testing, is supposed to be done by a certain date before the election. And many of our 132 electoral districts did the testing on time, but 28 of them were late, and 10 districts had no tests at all. That is, voters went in and used equipment that was not tested before the election. We've all heard about the machine issues, and we're not really investigating those too deeply. However, there's a forensic audit going on in Georgia and Arizona. In Arizona, it's one county, and I believe it's one county in Georgia. And a forensic audit is what we really need in Virginia, where we look at everything: the machines, the ballots, the absentee ballots, the applications for absentee ballots, the envelopes. But it's very costly, and as we've seen in Arizona and Georgia, there's massive litigation against such an audit, and that just adds to the cost. So at this point, we're not in a position to request the forensic audit, but we're anxious to hear what happens in Georgia and Arizona with their forensic audits. Another area of concern for us is something that was done in 2018. It's called the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, which was a bipartisan legislative commission set up to do a deep analysis of the election systems in Virginia. Their report, which was published on September 10th in 2018, had 22 recommendations for improvement in our election system. Many of those recommendations focused on the kind of, we'll call them irregularities, that we had last November. And we're trying to ascertain now exactly which ones of those recommendations were implemented and which ones were not. Most of them focused on voter roll maintenance. It's a huge issue here in Virginia. It was 2.5 years ago. Nothing was really done about it, and it's imperative that we get those voter rolls cleaned up before the next election. Now, there's a couple of things that we have completed. We completed the analysis of the logic and accuracy testing, and we did that with FOIA requests to each location for their reports, and that worked very well. We've also tracked down all the dark money that was invested in Virginia from what you heard about, the Zuckerberg money from Facebook. Zuckerberg and his wife put up $400 million nationwide, and they donated it to a very small left-leaning organization in Chicago called the Center for Technical and Civic Life. The Center for Technical and Civic Life then distributed that $400 million nationwide to local elections. They actually started before they distributed the money by offering free training to registrars, and many registrars in Virginia took them up on the training last March. And then that's how they created a relationship with those registrars and then offered them what they called COVID grants. That is money to each electoral district that requested it to help with their drop boxes, staffing, satellite voting locations, etc. And I'll just give you the recap of what was invested by this group in Virginia. It's almost $4 million. 14 of the locations that received a grant were won by Biden, and those 14 locations received $3.5 million. 25 of the locations that they gave grants to were won by Trump, and they received $420,000. So the majority of the funds were targeted to heavy Democrat areas to assist in increasing the turnout in those areas, and it appears to have worked. For instance, Fairfax County, which was the largest beneficiary of the Zuckerberg money, received $1.4 million and increased the Democrat vote by 18%. Prince William was second at $631,000, and they increased the Democrat vote by 72%. Now, many people are checking into this Zuckerberg funding. You may have heard of the Armstead Project. Capital Research Center, who we work with in D.C., is looking into it. And the Public Interest Legal Foundation is also checking into whether or not this third-party money violates any election law. At this point, we don't know, but we'll find out. It certainly isn't fair, and it certainly sounds like it does violate the law. We were able to track down all of these grants in Virginia with FOIA requests to the registrars, and we do have a complete accounting of the investment in Virginia. As a matter of fact, 2 articles were written that we collaborated on from the Capital Research Center, one in January and one recently in March, which explains in great detail what happened in Virginia and how the money was distributed. I recommend that you go to the website of the Capital Research Center and review those articles. An area of major concern to us also is something called personal affidavits. As you all know, they have changed the election law here in Virginia where you don't need a photo ID. As a matter of fact, you don't need an ID. All you need is a utility bill with an address that matches the voter rolls. Well, if you don't have that, copy of your lease. And if you don't have anything, you can show up to vote, and all you do is sign an affidavit. You print your name, you sign your name, and it says on the instructions that the only necessary information on that form, and it asks for address and other information, you're swearing that you are who you say you are, is your name. So all you have to do is sign a piece of paper and you can vote. So we want to know how many of those were there in the November election, where are they being kept? I presume the local registrar has them. And by signing this, if you're lying, it's subject to a felony charge. We want to know how many felony investigations there have been to find out if these people are who they say they are. And then how many convictions. And I think we all pretty much know the answer to those questions. So there's a couple of things now that we think are going to be important going forward based on what we know so far. As I said, this is our interim report. We plan to have a final report in June, and a couple of things that we think should happen at this point. We think there should be a very close relationship between our local GOP committee units and the local registrar, mainly to be sure that the voter rolls are being maintained according to state law, but also because staffing of election officials in all precincts and other issues that are critical with the registrar. And we think it's important that those relationships between the local unit and the registrar are extremely close. You may have heard the governor signed several pieces of legislation about the election in November. And so we have to decide how we're going to play the hand we're dealt. And I think it starts with eyes on every ballot. We need to recruit volunteers for poll watches to watch every single application and every single ballot. That includes the central absentee ballot precincts. Under the new law, there has to be one in all voting jurisdictions. We need poll watchers in every precinct all election day long. And so we're going to need an army of volunteers to watch the next election. We need a significant statewide legal team so that when issues arise, all during the 45 days of voting, it's not an election day anymore, it's an election 45 days. From September 18th on, we're going to have an election. And we need a legal team available to us so that when we see issues, when we're thrown out of precincts, we can immediately take legal action to stop it. We also have to train our voters. We have to play the hand we're dealt. And the new hand is you vote by mail. We should encourage Republican voters to vote as early as possible, however you feel comfortable, either by absentee, voting in person, drop box, whatever makes you comfortable, but vote early. Don't wait till election day. That'll really throw the Dems off You know, they'll have to try to judge the turnout based on the early voting. They kind of watch election day to see what our turnout looks like and then see how many votes they need at the end of the day. That's what it looks like to me anyway. So I think we should encourage our voters to vote as early as possible. The other thing is we need a massive effort to cure ballots. What's been passed into law now is when a ballot shows up in the mail and there's an issue with the envelope, it can go back to the voter to be corrected. And the registrars are responsible to do that. And in certain areas, we need to be there to make sure those ballots are being cured in Republican areas. It's something that we just have to do, and it's going to require more volunteers. So our thinking right now is close relationship between the local units and the registrars, poll watchers in every precinct, as many as election officials as we're entitled to, and then training our voters to play the hand they're dealt. And so that's our interim report, and we look forward to a final report in June.